Have you ever come away from a movie thinking that villain was justified? Or have you ever read a book and sympathized with the bad guy? If there's one thing people seem to love, it's a villain. And to be fair, who doesn't love a compelling character who you definitely don't want to root for, but you also love to hate? Beloved characters like Darth Vader, Loki, and the Joker can be incredibly fun to watch and fascinating to examine. After all, what's a story without conflict? And nothing quite beats the thrill of consuming a piece of fiction and being utterly captivated by the villain. Because, in a way, isn't it comforting to look around at all the terrible people and things happening and see a villain that is simply pure evil, and feel slightly comforted because at least that isn't reality? But lately, there's been a disappointing shift in the media depicting villains and how society seems to receive those villains. Many have been given a tragic origin story or some dramatic moment in the past that makes everything they did more explainable. One of the best instances of this trope would be the new hit movie Wicked, which is based on a musical. Wicked asked, what if the Wicked Witch of the West wasn't the bad guy? And did it phenomenally. Elphaba is an incredible protagonist, and what makes it work is that it wasn't trying to rewrite the narrative of The Wizard of Oz. It was simply offering a different version of events. One can still watch The Wizard of Oz and keep the kind, determined Elphaba separate from the genuinely terrifying Wicked Witch. Elphaba is a complex character with fascinating motivations that don't make one rewatch The Wizard of Oz and think that the witch did nothing wrong. But this trope has gone a bit too far. For instance, take Cruella de Vil, whose name can be broken down into cruel devil. In 101 Dalmatians, Cruella takes some downright awful actions. There are some strange messages in the outdated piece of media, like being older and unmarried is bad, and being a business-motivated woman is also somehow criminal. Cruella drops an iconic feminist quote, of course, in the live action, but putting aside the outdated context of Cruella's villainy, simply look at the actions and the intent. Action: dog nap 101 puppies. Intent: turn them into a coat. Most of society has turned a nose up at killing animals for the intent of wearing them. It's considered to be needlessly cruel. Cruella is needlessly cruel, as is obvious from her name. Then, in 2021, Emma Stone gave a marvelous performance in the movie Cruella. Received overall good reviews with 78% on Rotten Tomatoes and a 7.3 out of 10 on IMDb. The puppy murderer now had a tragic backstory with a mean boss, mother-killing Dalmatians, and mental illness. And of course, that plays into a very common and problematic trope of people who struggle with mental illness being violent, being criminals, but it also plays into a negative trope of justifying actions because someone struggles with a mental illness. Overall, not a great take. And it seemed now that every single villain had to have some sort of motivation or reason, a redeemable quality. Even those established as wicked and cruel were forgivable. This mindset can even be traced back to more classic villains like Darth Vader. On his own, Darth Vader is a striking man, imposing, scary, evil. He had good in him, but he had chosen the darkness. And yes, at the end, he turned back to the light side, but he chose the light side, the darkness, of his own accord. He had done terrible things, committed atrocities. He was a bad person. Then came the prequels, and they changed Darth Vader. His backstory was so incredibly tragic, and there is so much sympathy, as there should be, for the little boy who grew up in slavery, who lost his mother, and was so terrified of losing his wife, he took abhorrent action. But there's a resounding theme in the fan base of Star Wars. A surprising number of people online seem to see nothing wrong with what Anakin did, and even consider the Jedi the villains. And yet, George Lucas himself wanted the Empire to emulate that of the Nazis. Totalitarian government, incredibly militaristic, focused on conquering and owning as much as possible at the expense of other groups. And yes, Anakin's story is sad. It is a tragedy, but that does not excuse his actions. The final villain that I will be looking at is Cogito Ergo Sum. I think, therefore I am. A reference to the 1995 video game adaptation of a 1967 short story by Harlan Ellison. I have no mouth and I must scream. The story is disgusting. It's revolting, with some of the worst body horror in writing. It is a sick story, one about a computer who gains consciousness, destroys all of humanity, and keeps 5 alive to torment them for hundreds and hundreds of years. 4 men, 1 woman. And the things Am does to these people and the things they do to each other in desperation are horrifying. There's fan art of Am that humanizes him. There's been online discourse about how his actions were justified because humans exploited him. But Am isn't human. There is no conscience, no empathy, no moment like Darth Vader where he realizes he's in the wrong and does good. Am hates. There's a quote from the short story in which Am says, "If the word hate was engraved on each nanoangstrom of those hundreds of millions of miles, it would not equal 1/1 billionth of the hate I feel for humans at this micro instant for you." A villain doesn't need to be a good person. A villain doesn't need redeeming features or qualities. Sometimes a character is flat out rotten. Because the trope of giving every villain a redeeming quality leads to every villain having a redeeming quality, even when it's not true to the story. Let villains be villains. The Joker doesn't need a tragic origin story. Most Disney villains are evil, and it can be left at that. Not everyone needs or deserves to be humanized. Sometimes a villain can simply be that. A villain.